My understanding of the Buddhist laws of speech, and Ron and John can correct me, is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? And is this the time to be saying it? I think those four things apply to the things I'm going to, especially two things I'm going to talk about. One is I'd like to debunk what I think is a myth that is very popular in this sort of meeting, and that is that the budget is about maximizing the growth rate of GDP. I think that's incorrect, and I'd like to sort of illustrate that, but I'd like to give you the contrary, sort of the assertion, what I think it is. I think the budget is about financing the government's agenda in a fiscally responsible way. Right? And to illustrate that, I'm going to use the real-world example of this government's agenda, the Trudeau government of today. They came into power saying they would do a number of things, including marijuana legalization, assisted dying legislation, Indigenous reconciliation. Well, all of those things, right, had to end up being funded in the budget, right? And so there's a process for that, and that means that it starts with mandate letters. And so if Ron, you want to be my Minister of Justice, and maybe Joelle, the Minister of Health, and you would get a mandate letter saying, I want you to work with each other and bring to Cabinet an initiative on marijuana legalization, and you would do that, and you would convince your Cabinet colleagues, you would get what's called approval in principle. That then would go to, along with all of the other approvals in principle, that then would go to two people for decision, the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance, as to whether that gets money in the budget. So if you have the idea that the budget is just about maximizing the growth rate of GDP, that's wrong. Another thing I'd like to mention is that, so there's sort of a vibe as well that, and when I started to first give my course, design a course in measuring the sustainable progress of societies, I thought I would use a humorous analogy, which I eventually didn't, but I think it's apt for this one, is that GDP in some audiences is a bad dog, right? So it's a bad dog, so it needs to either be punished or taught to behave or maybe even euthanized, right? But, so I'm not saying that GDP is a bad dog. I'm not saying it's a good dog. I'm just saying it's a dog, okay? So in that GDP is a dog, you expect it to do dog things, right? So if you throw a ball, the dog will probably fetch it for you, right? If you do other, if you put food in front of the dog will probably eat it. You would not, though, expect your dog to climb a tree, would you? Right? So the GDP was designed and has things that it can do, things that it can't do, right? Similarly, if you ask your cat to fetch, I don't think you'll have very much success, right? So there are things that the GDP is capable of. It is neither useless nor destructive, right? I would say that sort of very plainly to you. So now we'll go to the actual talk, which is called Running the Gauntlet. And so it also reflects my experience here and the sort of buzz that I've heard among academics, well, governments don't listen to us, right? And my response to that was, well, maybe you're not talking a language that they understand. And I don't mean by converting everything to GDP numbers or equivalent money, all respect to, and I understand the reasons for doing that. So what is that language, right? So this is called Running the Gauntlet for a particular reason, which is it is tough to get your initiative in front of Cabinet, and you're going to face some tough questions, right? So here, just to some general Canada here, that we're about what should Canada do, right, fundamentally. Canada is a broad sense, a broad notion. It includes everything that Danny's doing. It includes everything that you all are doing, and even internationally we'll learn from you. But at the federal level, policy initiatives are considered by Cabinet, which is a political body, right? And it must receive, I said this already, approval in principle. Due diligence, though, your ideas will have to go through a screen through the central agencies, right? So you write what's called a memorandum to cabinet, and then you will have central agency meetings where they pound the hell out of your proposal, quite frankly, right? So how are they going to do that? So what are the central agencies? There's Finance Canada, responsible for the economy, the tax system, the annual budget, Treasury Board Secretariat, spending authority, value for money. Privy Council Office is the Prime Minister's department, right? And it's responsible for policy coordination and for, said it before, implementing the government's agenda. It's got two branches, policy and machinery of government. That does become a little bit important later on. So challenge function. So you ask a Privy Council Office person or Treasury Board or Finance Canada, what's your job? We do challenge function. So you bring us proposals and we say, what's wrong with it, right? What's good about it, but what's wrong with it? You know, is the operating sort of logic, if you will. But before you even get in, here's the most fundamental question of all, right? Cabinet is a crowded place. All the ministers, Joël and Ron and all of you other ministers, you all want your profile, you want your programs to be adopted and, you know, be the flagship of the government. So you're competing for attention, you're competing for cabinet time. So you better be able to convince PCO that this is the right time, right? And there's a solid reason for this. So why this, right? So possible answers in this context, GDP is incomplete or misleading, or because there's an opportunity for Canada to do something better. What's it meant to achieve? You better tell me. If I'm PCO, I was there for 4 years, you better tell me what you think this is going to do, right? And you better be able to answer Anders' critique that, well, maybe these haven't been so useful, so is that history going to repeat itself? So possible answers. So these are not exhaustive by any means. Whoever the proponent is would need to give an answer to that question. Now, who cares about this, right? And I think that's something Danny's really working on, trying to animate within province of Nova Scotia. Let's make them care, right? Let's sort of prepare the ground for this to be politically sort of saleable. Will some find it frivolous? John's done a lot of work trying to get people to take happiness seriously. So is this a winner, politically speaking? Why now, right? Same as the Buddhist laws of speech, like, why now? Why is this the right time to do this? There's some possible answers here. Which one is the most compelling? Which one are you going to go with? Of course, Canada doesn't live in the proverbial vacuum. We want to be informed by the best practices in the world, including by the OECD, which is, its motto is better policies for better lives, and exists really to provide that space where countries can get together and say, well, what are those better policies for better lives? And there's a list of organizations that have been providing advice, including not only sort of intergovernmental or UN type organizations, but also the World Economic Forum has done some really outstanding work in this field. So what's out there? What's the best? How is this going to be credible if we put it out to Canadians, right? Credible with you in the room and credible with Canadians. What do we think of it? So if you're writing this memorandum to Cabinet, you would need to answer, what do we think of it, right? Do we agree with the wealth approach? Do we agree with happiness? Do we agree with, so how do we weight these things? How do we view the Canadian Index of Well-Being, whether it's pluses and minuses, and do the analysis? What are other countries doing? We've heard a lot about what other countries doing, but obviously, if Canada is going to be doing this credibly, it wants to, and a large part of the purpose for this gathering is exactly that. Like, what are other countries doing? What has been their experience? How can that inform what we're doing? How has that worked out for them? Well, again, the Hayden and Wilson work provides some insights, and I'm sure there's lots more work that can be done on that. But as a side comment, sitting here listening to Danny and others talking about the progress that has been made and the people, the groups and organizations that have been influenced, Brian, by the Canadian Index of Well-Being, I find that quite impressive, right? And I was sitting there asking myself, well, what's missing? Is it just that the government hasn't moved on this? Because, well, I'm not sure, for the reasons we heard yesterday, that for the possibility of window dressing and manipulation, maybe, I got 5 minutes, maybe we don't want the government doing its own self-evaluation, right? In my course, I certainly didn't give the students the opportunity for self-evaluation. Right? So a number of other annoying questions, like how are we adding value here? Aren't we measured enough? OECD measures us. All these groups, if you can look it up, have measures of Canada's performance. Well, what the heck? How are we adding value? You want us to spend money on this? You want us to spend political capital on this? Tell us how it's going to be better than this. Tell us what we don't know that this is going to help us with. Possible answer, need to reflect Canadian values and use Canadian data. And that's actually my answer to this question. You may have a different answer. What's the Government of Canada doing already? And I think I missed an important one. Are these presentations going to be public? They're going to be published, or?
If you agree.
I'm fine with that, because I want to sort of just zip through them and not have to stop to read them. But just to give you a sense of how many questions and the nature of the questions that you're going to face if you want to bring something to Cabinet. Have you consulted with Canadian international experts in the field and with Canadians, right? So Brian told us about the pilot groups. Definitely, Danny is doing a lot of work that is directly sort of grassroots. Were you able to find consensus? Oops. Okay. So I didn't see a lot of consensus in this room yesterday and today. And there was a comment about fragmentation, right? So if we go right back to, and I think I actually missed the slide, what is this? What this are we bringing to Cabinet? Is it a Canadian Index of Well-Being? Is it the Engage Nova Scotia approach? Is it happiness? Is it national wealth? What is it? Is it some blend of those? Is it the OECD Better Life Index, tweaked in certain ways as New Zealand did? What is it? Right? Are the provinces active in this space? Federal government always has to know that. Who should do it? So we get back to this window dressing problem, right? Or the potential for window dressing. Would this government choose indicators that it does well on or that it can brag about, right? So who within the federal government? New Zealand Treasury Board does it. The Statistics Agency in the UK does it. Or could we create an independent, arm's-length, special purpose organization? I think that would be my preference in a transparency and accountability sense, that it be insulated from this problem of window dressing. What are the options? MC, you have to give options. How much will it cost? Right, and here's where it fits into the budget process. So you need to declare how much it'll cost, and then if that's approved in principle in Cabinet, it will go to the Prime Minister and the the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance, right? Do we need legislation? Is this the best use of resources? Okay, you got to convince the Department of Finance that some other expenditure, and so convince me, so I worked there for 12 years, convince me that just what we have now, which is the wealth of statistics that are generated by Statistics Canada, and it's the best statistical agency in the world, by the way, that researchers who are interested in happiness or child poverty or whatever, either can go to existing data, or maybe we should just improve the data. But you got to convince me. Which minister is bringing this? So that goes to the idea that without some strong sort of central leadership through a prime minister or a king, but in order to overcome those natural silos, departmental silos, you need that strong central direction to force actually Joël and Ron and all of you other cabinet ministers to work together, because your natural inclination is just to take care of your own house. So I think you've gotten the general idea, so I can stop there and not take any more time. Thank you very much.